Well, hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now we're back to business with top 10 ranking videos. There have been quite a lot of circumstances that kind of made me push these into the January, but on the bright side, there are a lot of very cool videos for January now. So, we already determined the class relationships where Cosmic and Skill were at the bottom. I already ranked top 10 Cosmic 7-star champions, and now we're going to be doing that with the Skill champions. Just like before, champions who are not out as 7 stars are excluded from this list, but will be given honorable mentions if they would find themselves on this list for sure as soon as they come out as 7 stars, basically. There is a reason for excluding the 6 stars at this point, currently already in the game, and that is because these lists are meant primarily as a showcase of the most sought after ranked up champions that are effectively competing for your resources and acquisition ability, as in which champions you chase, which champions you most frequently rank up or see ranked up at competitive gameplay situations. That is not to say that 6-star champions are not useful anymore in the game, not at all. I will still be shouting them out, and a lot of 6 stars still provide valuable uses for players in the game in most game modes, even in Battlegrounds for the whales that pretty much have the entire decks of 7-star rank 3s and now already rank 4s. We do see a handful of 6 stars typically still sneaking in because they can, punch up against the 7-star rank 3s even if they are kind of like an entire rank behind and missing some of the 7-star stat focuses and challenger ratings. But obviously that is going to become significantly harder as 7-star rank 4s become more popular. We already have some mega whales with a full profile of 7-star rank 4s, so the general population is gonna acquire, several of those within the next half a year for sure. That said, the old skill top 10 was Kate Bishop, Kingpin, Nick Fury, and as we can see, immediately the top 3 will fall off, because even currently, I'd say that, as soon as either one of those champions come out to 7-star, they do return to the top positions. Then we have Bullseye. We had split 5th position in between Korgatum and Killmonger, which I will divide now. Then we have Mantis, Massacre, Crossbones, Black Cat, and Mole-Man. All nice and well. So, again, it is quite evident that skill class is in a fairly poor position right now. Because, again, Nick Fury, Kate Bishop, Kingpin does not exist as 7 stars. And even somebody like Stealthy would be quite significant addition. But it's not there. And, Baron Zemo potentially could make it up there too, but quite a lot of the better skill champions just do not exist as 7 stars. And skill is by far definitely the most defense-centric class, where most of the champions proportionally, or half of them almost, are defensively minded. I will be pointing out which champion makes the list primarily as an attacker and defender, so you guys can differentiate in between your own priorities, obviously. So if you do not care much about Lions War and Battlegrounds, then, ignore the defensive champions and focus on the offensive ones. So, again, just an extra special shout out to Kate. We could have had her as 7-star. We could have had her as 7-star. Still, such an amazing character, just utterly capable, and especially right now, man. Kate in current Battlegrounds meta with the power shield just nukes. And then we have, why is it always trying to reload it? And then we have obviously Nick Fury, who's crazy too with his second life. And then we also have Kingpin, who I cannot wait to see as 7-star. Probably my most wanted 7-star, or most wanted champion to become 7-star. There will be actually a separate video on that, as in like the 6-star champions that are must rank, and also my personal most wanteds. Right. So let's move on to spot number 10. And spot number 10, I'm just going to give it to Mole-Man. Mole-Man, obviously, as we all know, was, let's say, a top 3 skill champion, and then Kabam, or let's say top 5 skill champion, depending where you landed. And then Kabam decided to bug fix after several years. And I'm not gonna lie, that bug fix does hurt him a lot. Most people, and especially if you're not somebody who uses Mole-Man a lot, do not even understand how badly he got held back with that bug fix. If he could maintain his damage and true accuracy buff, he would still be one of the top 3 skill champions in the game right now, without a doubt, in my opinion. I actually do use Mole Man quite frequently, either in my Balgrons decks or at the moment also in Alliance Quest. I like using the guy typically, you know, for questing scenarios as well. Throw one heavy attack, take a hit on the block, and, you know, you're in the frenzy if you're running recall masteries. If not, then it's 2 heavy attacks. But, you know, access to a lot of bleed, access to shock if needed, debuff purification, quite a lot in that kit that I do like. And for most part, the people who do have Mole Man do, you know, love him. Again, his biggest problem in terms of popularity is that he is one of the Omega Days champions, so he's not available in the game really in just about any other way currently. Eventually, he's bound to join the base pool, but yeah, acquisition on him is quite a tricky one. But I would still place him in spot number 10. As an alternative, if you guys do not want to accept my Mole Man pick, I will go ahead and pick Chilt for that position. I do think Chilt is a fairly common champion as well. Chilt is somebody that I always characterize as solid. She would not make a top 10 or close to top 10 list in just about any other class, but in general, she's, you know, decent. She's definitely not a bad champion. And you can see quite a lot of dedicated fans for Chilt, and she is capable of doing some very interesting things. But I think that kind of showed is that Chilt was one of the options also for like the Necro runs and challenges now. And she just didn't really, you know, quite make it up there. She's good. She's not great. Right. Spot number 9 is going to go to Massacre. And this is actually kind of upsetting me a little bit because, well, let's face it, I love the champion. I love the champion before his buff. I thought he was underrated, and I have always enjoyed using him. And there was a time and place in the game where I would have called Massacre a top 5 to top 10 Balgrons attacker, period, throughout all classes. But even after becoming a 7-star and available to anybody who's willing to do the torturous CCP Kareem challenges, gotta hate those, he's just fallen off. Realistically, he has. A lot of the newer defenders do not really, you know, match up great against him. Like currently, in between the top defensive options, which would be, obviously, we have Onslaught, we have like Onslaught, Serpent, Bullseye, Enchantress, and so on and so forth. Maestro, well, Maestro not as much, but still those 4. And he doesn't really do any of them that great. Like, he can obviously nuke Onslaught, but if you do Incinerate Onslaught, then you take the Neuroshock damage, and that's a bit tricky. Then Serpent doesn't really work there. Bullseye, you know, you can nuke him, but you can take that bleed damage from level 1s. And Enchantress, you know, he's no better than just about anybody else. So unfortunately, here we are. He just doesn't seem to be answering the problems of today, really. I do feel like he's the type of champion that could easily become more popular should, you know, a different meta defensive set of champions would appear, but I kind of also hesitate to think about seeing how Kabam is constructing their defenders currently. I hope we never get something similar to Serpent, Enchantress, Bullseye, and etc. again. And moving on, spot number 8. But yeah, like Massacre, but he definitely has lost some of his value. Is Black Cat. Black Cat, I think, is kind of holding steady and stable. There are metas where she's amazing against just about anybody. Then there are metas where she's just about average. She does have a surprisingly large amount of champions that she does well against. And again, the biggest problem for Black Cat would be that her best matchups are also kind of getting phased out, ironically, due to the fact that they're not wildly popular or released as 7-stars. For instance, you know, she's a very, very good Nick Fury champion, but, you know, there are better ones. And then she's very solid against Thing, that's very meta-dependent. She was very good against Hulkling, and Hulkling has 6 stars, posing significantly less of a threat than he used to be, especially considering how Mystic class is flourishing right now. And there are times and places absolutely for her, and I love the champion. She is one of the most satisfying champions to play. Just like Massacre, she's also primarily offensive champion. There's very little for her on defense. That's another thing that I didn't mention. Mole Man is actually a fairly solid dual threat, obviously primarily an attacker. But Black Cat, Massacre, those are, you know, specifically offensive champions that do provide solutions to, you know, very specific problems. But Still, absolutely love the champion. One of those champions that I just always enjoy to use when the time and place calls for it. She's not a champion that I try or would try to force into metas or matchups that she doesn't necessarily excel in. And I think a solid addition to just about anybody. She also currently is not in the base crystal pool. Actually, none of the champions I listed so far are, because Massacre is the CCP challenge selector, Mallman is Omega Days, and Black Cat, I believe, was Loyalty Crystal. So none of these are, I guess, in the easiest method of acquisition. But still, I do see them quite a lot, and most of the people who do have these champions, I'd say have them at the very least at rank 2, often at rank 3. And Black Cat, I feel like, deserves the spot number 8. Spot number 7 is going to be speculative, because this champion just got released as 7-star. We saw Hitmonkey tear through Battlegrounds in a ton of matchups, and he definitely has a lot of fans. Hitmonkey is kind of a quintessential nuke type of champion that also can potentially have some defensive value in some metas more than others, especially if there is some sort of damage mitigation. Because, Hitmonkey typically in defense is either you nuke him or you mess up against him and he lands a combo and half your health is gone. Because, he, has his guaranteed crits. So, a champion that has aged quite well. I do think a very, very, very fast Battlegrounds nuke. We'll see how he matches up with the modern champions, but because it could be a fairly similar situation. Somebody like Massacre, where, it's not necessarily the greatest Bullseye Serpent, yada yada counter. I do think, however, his speed could make up for it. And currently, he is kind of enjoying a very huge amount of hype for being newly released as 7-star, just fresh in the Titan Crystal. So obviously not that many people have him. But for most part, whenever I see Hitmonkey being pulled, he is getting ranked up, especially also because skill, again, does not have that many, great offensive 7-star options. Most of them, well, several of them being limited to the 6-star level still. But, again, could be wrong with this, but I do see quite a lot of Hitmonkey hype, rank ups, and him being placed on people's wish lists, so on and so forth. Absolutely think he will earn his stripes. Moving on to spot number 6, I'm going to give to Mantis. Offensively speaking, Mantis would be a top 3 skill champion. Because obviously we're going to go quite heavy on the defensive aspect. And the great thing about Mantis obviously is her level 2 nuke. As long as you can operate her normally, she will just about go and destroy, anybody with a level 2. So she can be quite fast, quite nukey. She did get a tune-up, which actually was more significant than it initially appeared, because it took away a lot of necessity for her intercepts. Previously, you had to work harder and longer in order to fully ramp her up. And now you really just need to land in like a couple of intercepts on your way to level 2, because the rest of the charge you can easily get off a single Intimidate hitting that block. Now, Mantis still has a problem of Intimidate being relatively ineffectual debuff, because AI likes to ignore it. It doesn't offer you any guarantees, and you are never really safe dashing in to hit that block. That said, I think one of the cooler aspects of Mantis, again, can also be her unexpected value as a defender, because, in several metas, for instance, you want to avoid her from throwing level 1, that often can involve some chip damage. She just about always can potentially fail your parries as well with her Tranquilize, which, can lead to mistakes. And lastly, if you do manage to kind of trick opponent into a science-based matchup, well, just about any science champion is absolutely useless against her because of the 100% debuff ability accuracy reduction. So, I do think she's quite cool. And again, offensively, that nuke ability translates quite well to Mantis taking other class champions too. Like potentially Sasquatches or, just about on any class. As long as her level 2 can crit, you're doing quite well. And obviously, you could argue that she's potentially the best photon counter in the game, or top 3 at the very least, which is still significant. Photon has definitely lost some of her defensive value, or, scare level. I apologize for that. But she's still ever so present, and you do want to have a solid option for Photon whenever you face her, and Mantis will be towards the top of that list. So not everybody's cup of tea, you do need to account for that. A lot of people do not particularly enjoy Mantis, and before you kind of dive into ranking her up, definitely play around with her to see if it is something that you would like to use. Now moving on to, I'd argue, the highest offensively based champion, that'll be Crossbones. Crossbones is definitely having an influx in popularity. You can see more and more skilled players use and rank up their Crossbones. I do, however, still feel like it is a bit of a specific fan group kind of club, because with Crossbones, again, he does have fairly peculiar playstyle. Not everybody will like it. I personally am not the biggest fan, and I will not deny it. And I am absolutely sure that the people who are the biggest fans of Crossbones would immediately throw him at top of the skill list ahead of everybody else, because whoever is a Crossbones fan is just about a fanatic level from what I have seen. However, you cannot deny that he is quite effective. His ability to switch off plenty of nodes, generate a lot of damage quite fast. Obviously, great counter against a ton of science champions, in between his shrug off ability and in between his furies reducing the opponent's defensive ability accuracy. Again, not the easiest champion to play, but offensively speaking, he would be just about the scariest attacker that skill class has right now, in terms of speed, in terms of the amount of matchups that he can potentially go through as well. However, again, keep in mind that he would be inhibiting quite high level of difficulty and very good execution of split minute decisions, I would say. That's about it on Crossbones. He's quite chunky, but very little defensive value in general. He's just about solely an offensive champion, or maybe a pinch defender, but it's not here nor there. Now then, we're gonna go ahead to the best, most popular, most used, most meta skilled champions, which unfortunately are just about exclusively defenders. We're gonna start with Killmonger, who I'm gonna be placing towards the bottom. The reason why Killmonger does have such an efficient downfall right now is because Killmonger is a champion that kind of gets countered by 2 or 3 classes on their innate abilities. Now, obviously, he's still a very potent defender. In generic situation, he's also a somewhat capable attacker. I have always quite liked using Killmonger in specific circumstances. For instance, when you're getting some meaningless debuffs placed on you, you kind of get a ton of extra power, and that is always fun. Also, like when you do have some of the synergies and you can get a true strike up with, I think that was the Void synergy, or whichever one. No, that was the Winter Soldier. If you can get that true strike activate and intercepts, then that has a lot of meaning. And he's a champion that can synergize quite well, to be honest. But, most of the people don't, because synergies have lost quite a lot of place in the game. All that said, he can still be a capable attacker in a pinch, especially if you're not on time constraints for places like Alliance War or General Questing, if you need him to answer specific problems. But let's not kid ourselves, he is just about primarily a defender. He does have additional crit resistance in his base attributes, which is always helpful, and then his damage back, based on his SIG, can cause a ton of problems if you do not manage his power accurately. The biggest weakness in his kit always has been, is that armor break, and that is what I mean, that I kind of feel like Killmonger gets countered by quite few class abilities, because cosmic champions, for instance, love armor break because it is there to counter tech champions, who typically has armor ups, and that means that a significant portion of the cosmic champions will be very, very capable against Killmonger. Then skilled champions typically, or often, has some sort of ability accuracy reduction in their kit, which would also be effective against preventing damage back from Killmonger. And then obviously we naturally have the mutant champions, who will have ways to bypass Killmonger's damage, either by non-contact hits, like Onslaught, like Negasonic Teenage Warhead, and then we also have the damage reflection of Dazzler and Namor now. And lastly, CGR just stomps this. But CGR does not exist as 7-star, and as we are progressing in the game, that might be more, less relevant. That might be something that Killmonger is able to kind of like endure. But as it stands right now, I do think all 4 of the champions that we're going to talk about right now has quite a lot of defensive value for sure. I also think that Killmonger kind of gets switched off or bypassed by most amount of champions. That is why I will put him towards, the bottom of that. Spot number 3, and again, it's a defensive champion that I actually happen to like. Attuma is a very good offensive champion if you can have a fast tempo, and if it's like a medium to long level fight, because he ramps up really well. Level 3 can do insane amount of damage, and once you have, ramped him up efficiently and well, he's a bit of a beast. But again, 90+% of use for Attuma is as a defender, and the biggest weakness of Attuma would be if you do counter him, he's a nothing fight. If you do have somebody, let's say, that has non-contact attacks, then all of a sudden, Attuma is not dangerous at all. Then, all of a sudden, he's just, same thing as beating on Groot. Even to the point where, he's still kind of stun immune, but that's just about it. Also, he's, quite happy to be at higher sig. I do not recommend ranking him unduped, just like Killmonger. But the best thing about Attuma, obviously, is he has the least amount of counters, I would say. Currently, Kabam is definitely increasing that amount because, Dazzler, once awakened, will be able to counter him. Now we have Negasonic Teenage Warhead. That's also fairly popular mutant. And we have always had like Shuri, and we have Onslaught. And his bigger problem is that a lot of champs that do counter him quite good and quite popular and quite present in the game. So in just about every meta, there will be, champs that you see in people's decks or other people's go-to champions, for alliance war paths that can counter Attuma. Still, definitely sought after champion, still definitely ranked up. I do have a rank 3 Attuma myself. He, has earned his stripes. He is quite valuable to have access to. He's not the most fun rank up. He's not a rank up that typically will, have you grinning from ear to ear. But, similar text I could say about both of the remaining skill champions too. I do think he is slightly better as defender than Killmonger and attacker in specific conditions. That's why I placed him slightly higher. And the spot number 2, I'm just going to give it to Korg. Korg's like the game's staple defender. Korg is hated by so many people, but I actually think that in face of, Serpent and Enchantress and the New Age defenders, we should all learn to appreciate how annoying and BS Korg was. He still seems a lot more fair and balanced. And the reason why Korg is higher than these guys is that even though he technically has the largest amount of counters, because you can outskill this fight with a lot of champions. And obviously, a lot of mutant champions that would counter Attuma do counter Korg too. He still does typically better because when he's countered, he's not necessarily a vanilla fight. There's still that level 1 that has harder, dex timing that people do mess up on occasionally, myself included. Obviously, it's dexable. You can mess up on it. There's still, AI refuses to come in for an intercept or throw special type of situations. And that purification still can mess with you. Damage back can still mess with you. And he does have a fair amount of resistances and immunities that do kind of help you. Even when it comes to debuffs, against Attuma, you can get away with debuffing him if you do not parry stun him. Against Killmonger, you can debuff him if you do have ability to manage his power, for instance, or if you do not do it too heavily. Against Korg, that is always much harder. His damage mitigation that he gets with his rock stacks also naturally slows down the fight and forces a lot of champions to be very careful about how they time things, and therefore I do think Korg has aged quite well. He's not necessarily the defensive ace in a hole that he once was, but he's still a solid champion that will, either capitalize on opponent making the mistakes or, force opponents in uncomfortable situations or just stretch the fight out. So I do think that out of all of these three defensive champions that I previously kind of banked in together, currently I would value Korg the highest, personally. And then the top one, unfortunately, is Bullseye. Now, the good and cool thing kind of is that, for one reason or another, Bullseye has actually been like very useful offensively. Be that, incursions with that Power Sting node, where every time you bleed the opponent, you place Power Sting, or be that even the latest like Autumn of Agony fight, and I'm quite sure a handful of previous Autumn of Agony fights as well. And that just proves that Bullseye has an incredibly good offensive kit to him. He just doesn't have enough damage. Really. Like, if his damage was like 20-30% better, we would be talking about Bullseye as like a really amazing dual threat champion. Just doesn't hit hard enough to be kind of like a good attacker. In quite a lot of metas, you can actually use Bullseye in a pinch as an attacker when you have to, and I have. Like, you can take a thing down. I have taken a photon down with him, and in a current meta, for instance, access to his true accuracy enable you to use him against, Shocker and Guardian and champions like that. And in a pinch situation, it can really work, and it happens more often than, with other skilled defenders. But realistically, we're here for his defense. Now, he did get a minor defensive nerf, because now you can somewhat reliably dex his level 1. It is something that I'm still working on and trying to get better on, but it's definitely doable with just about anyone now. And obviously, the tuning adjustment also made him slightly weaker as a defender, where you can dex his basic hits now and not take the bleed damage. Still, though, he's just that guy. Just that guy in defense, where unless you do have a solid, great, or an amazing counter to him, you will kind of struggle against him. And that's where we're at. Like, unless you do have a very active answer to this guy, typically involving some sort of form of bleed immunity or, damage mitigation and block, on top of ability to strike him, bypassing that evade, he's going to be very frustrating to deal with in majority of the situations. I just hate design like that. The guy throws level 1, and unless you bleed immune, you can't even, like, that level 1 is so hard to dex. And even if you're skilled enough to dex it, unless you have bleed immune, you're screwed. Just because he activated it. Man, I guess I don't, quote unquote, hate him as much as Serpent and Enchantress anymore. But I still think a design like this has reduced the enjoyment of the game to a ton of people. Champions like this, to me, just kind of make me think that Kabam is intellectually bankrupt when designing defenders. It's like, we're going to switch off this, we're going to switch off that, we're going to punish you for that, nothing's going to work, none of the previous champions really are going to work, and we're going to sell you 15 new counters. Come on, even the new champion, Gentle, is advertised as Bullseye counter. And if you take a look at, Gentle getting advertised as Bullseye counter, and most of the 2024 champions that got released, Dazzler, Bullseye counter, Negasonic Teenage Warhead, a Bullseye counter, it's just, you can bet there's going to be another one or two that Kabam sells you, for sure. And again, I just don't think that's good for the game. But I do think currently he's still the most sought after, the most ranked skilled champion in the game. And again, these 4 guys are defenders, and would have significantly less to no value or offensively. And if you do not care about that, then look at Crossbones, look at Mantis, look at Hitmonkey, look at Black Cat, look at Massacre, look at Shield and Mallman. So, The summary for this is simple. New skill top 10. Number 1, Bullseye, then Korg, then Atuma, then Killmonger, 5 is Crossbones, 6 is Mantis, 7 is Hitmonkey, 8 is Black Cat, 9 is Massacre, 10 is Mole-Man / Shield, potentially, maybe. And then, obviously, champions that would immediately make that top 10. Kate as the best objective overall skill champion in the game, unfortunately not as a 7-star. Kingpin, aged not as great, would not necessarily make top 2 or 3. He'd probably still make top 3 or 4. Nick would return to that top 3 for sure, and Stealthy would be somewhat lower, but still would be in there. Above Massacre and Mole-Man for sure. So those have been my thoughts. The next video is going to be about Tech top 10 champions, and hopefully all goes well. That's going to come out tomorrow. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information